There's a big push on in Victoria for people to be able to legally change their gender on birth certificates without going through any sort of gender reassignment surgery, basically. They just self-identify, and the law says they can change their gender every 12 months if they like. Meantime, in the United Kingdom, former employees of the NHS Gender Clinic are speaking out about how vulnerable young people are potentially being pushed into serious life-altering medical and social choices, to the point Marcus Evans, a psychoanalyst and one of the governors of this centre, the Tavistock and Portman Trust, resigned recently over how the service is managed. There are calls for an investigation into this clinic. It's the only one that the NHS funds in the United Kingdom, but as yet nothing is underway. I know many of you have voiced your concerns over the Victorian legislation and, of course, the changes in Tasmania too that have taken gender off birth certificates in that state as well. Joining me tonight to go through all of these issues is columnist at the Australian newspaper and Credland favourite, Dr. Jennifer Oriel. Great to have you on the show. This is a really complex issue. When I read your column and reports in the Australian newspaper over the weekend, I was gobsmacked to read that in Victoria there's been a 41% increase in children being referred for gender reassignment studies, surveys, changes, surgery, the whole gamut, hormone treatment. How big is this problem, and where is it all generated from, Jennifer, in Australia? It seems to have come from nowhere in the last few years.
Well, the increase, that kind of increase has also been noted in other countries. In the UK, people who are studying this rapid rise in the referral of children for transgender or gender dysphoria treatments have attributed it in part to transgender activism, the visibility of transgender politics now and how they're being played out in schools, in the media, how laws are being reformed to promote transgender ideas about reality, i.e. that birth sex can be changed when in fact it cannot, it's biological fact. And also the way that parents now and physicians are under pressure through discrimination law, especially for doctors, that they can't actually say to children coming into their clinics, you know, there's nothing wrong with you, you don't have gender dysphoria. If they do something like that or refuse to refer them, they're called transphobic and are in quite a lot of danger in terms of workplace viability or workplace sustainability. So there are a lot of factors converging to produce this outcome. And as you said, the 41% increase in girls applying for this sort of treatment in Victoria is quite startling and started Bernard Lane on a trail of investigative reporting that's uncovering some really interesting information about what's going on with transgender treatments of children in Australia, including the fact that 2,415 children were referred for gender treatment between 2014 and 2018.
All right, let's look at the Victorian legislation. As I said at the top of the show, it doesn't require medical assessments, it doesn't require psychological assessments or obviously surgery to reassign gender. It's a self-identification process. My name's Peter, tomorrow I could be Peter, and in another 12 months' time I could change back to Peter. It's that simple. Now, it's being pushed very much by the Andrews government and members of the Greens. What's the ramifications for this? Because, you know, where are the lines to be drawn on female sport, for example? We saw the changes with Cricket Australia. What about access to women's shelters, places where women generally have had as a refuge or protection if people can just reassign their gender?
Well, when gender becomes a protected attribute under law, as it is in a lot of states and territories, if you change the definition of transsexualism to transgender and then you pass laws, you introduce more reforms, as many states and territories have in Australia, to make birth sex optional on birth certificates or to enable people to change their sex by statutory declaration, it means that basically men can apply to be in spaces normally assigned to women and girls simply by stating they're a woman. And in a number of instances, there's international precedent to demonstrate how problematic that is. There have been men who have applied for jobs at rape crisis centres. That was one of the earliest incidents that feminists raised overseas about why this is so problematic. There have been men who enter women's public shower facilities and, of course, toilets and so forth. So it can be very, very problematic. But at the basis of this, I think, is something really difficult to fathom, which is that we're being compelled to accept a lie. And the lie is that you can change birth sex. You can't. You're XY or XX, and that gene is expressed in every cell in the human body. You can't change it by statutory declaration. And that's what's so frightening, or maybe not frightening, but that's what I find so startling about this, the fundamental lie that we are being forced to accept by legislation, by decree.
But also I think what upsets me, and I wrote about this on the weekend, is that we're turning upside down all of our norms on the basis of a very small cohort of Australians who quite genuinely have issues of gender and have changed their gender and have done it going, as I wrote, to hell and back to do that. In the census data, it's just over 1,200 Australians that are in this situation. That's 0.005 of the Australian population. So everybody else has something as fundamental as their gender upturned on the basis of this very, very small cohort. And in particular, in relation to children, once you go down the path of hormone treatments, Professor Whitehall, who I interviewed on this show, Jennifer, is concerned about what it does to long-term fertility. And in the case in Tasmania, children can change their gender at age 16 without any recourse to their parents. I don't remember, with so many of these things at the moment, I don't remember this being much of a feature at the recent election campaign in Victoria. Is this social engineering by stealth? And how much of voters being heard here?
Well, I don't think they are being heard, and I think the problem is that if you start to write about these things, the amount of vitriol and hatred that's directed at you is quite extraordinary. One of the things I think that's important to say here is that one of the organisations that Bernard Lane has been questioning is the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne and the gender clinic there. He's posed questions to them that they will not answer, and he's posed them repeatedly. And what I find really interesting, I was reading through their guidelines today, and this is what they say. They admit this. This is the clinic that's actually treating children, and they've said they concede the recommendations made in this document are based primarily on clinician consensus, standards from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and findings from a limited number of non-randomised studies. Now, that means there is no valid scientific evidence underlying the guidelines that I can see. There's no valid... If it's not randomised research, it's not scientifically valid. They've also said in this document, the degree to which testosterone may reduce reproductive potential when taken in adolescence is unknown. Evidence that oestrogen suppresses sperm production and whether these effects are permanent is unknown. They know that puberty blockers can result in a loss of bone density caused by the lack of oestrogen and testosterone available to a child's growing body. They know that if a woman happens to have an unplanned pregnancy, that the effects of testosterone on the fetus are likely to cause harm. Now, if the research has no scientifically valid basis and these harms are known, and there are so many unknowns related to fertility and reproductive potential, and they know that bone density is an ongoing issue, how is it possible that there is not a national inquiry into the referral of children for services like puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones? How is this harm being allowed in Australia? Why are we so complacent about it? Why are so many people not caring that this is happening to kids? I mean, I think we should demand a national inquiry. We need to know how this is possibly allowed in a modern nation like Australia.
And that's exactly why anyone who raises this issue, any doctor who wants to say, let's have a psychological testing, or have we looked at whether this child is perhaps gay, not transsexual, whether any of those issues are canvassed. I think some of those concerns are all about silencing any sort of national, quite proper national debate, and right now it's experimentation. Jennifer, Oriel, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Peter.